Hey everyone, Eric Watson here, freelance writer, player of games, writer, voice recorder of videos, and a tabletop role-playing aficionado. Welcome to another DM's Guild review, my written and a video review series, where I take a look at the adventures and supplemental material at the Dungeon Masters Guild website. With this video, I'll be reviewing the DM Supplement Zem's Guide to Exploration, designed by Real Nito Games, aka Adam Winchell and Josh Ladd, for Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition. This review has been sponsored by the publisher, and a review copy has been provided for the purposes of this review. If you are interested in a sponsored review, you can reach me via email, Twitter, or Discord, or my submission form at roguewatson.com. If you enjoy the content, consider using my affiliate links for your online shopping and supporting me via patreon.com/roguewatson. Whenever I have put up a poll or just looked at polls online, but I've got my own for my Patreon D&D game series, I put up a player survey poll so I get a feel for where everybody feels for certain elements and themes of D&D and gameplay styles and tone, and I rank the different pillars of D&D, which is considered to be combat, social role-playing, and exploration, and which usually encompasses travel when a lot of people think of exploration, and that is always consistently the weakest set from all the different components. Everybody says that travel needs a lot of help in D&D, and people don't like traveling around. And I would agree, because Dungeons & Dragons is built for dungeon crawling. Everything works perfectly well, for the most part, in the dungeon crawl setting. Players are checking off every single one of those boxes, assuming there's some kind of social component they can roleplay with in the dungeon itself. But the best dungeon crawls, they involve choices that players can make. There's branching paths, there's things for them to interact with, puzzles to discover, secret doors, traps to survive against. Obviously, it's going to have combat in there, and then hopefully, as I mentioned, there will be some kind of avenue to allow for social role playing. So to me, exploration is fine when you're in the dungeon crawl. Exploration suffers when you're anywhere that's not a dungeon. And by dungeon, it could mean like you're also in a forest or something. As long as the players are in a context where they're on a map type setting and they're making choices about where to go and what to interact with. The problem is when you get into like travel exploration, then the players lose a lot of that agency, lose a lot of that choice, unless you're literally rolling in a very crazy like open world setting where you can let your players go anywhere they want. Obviously, as somebody who plays on a VTT, that does not happen in my games. But then instead you're traveling usually from a point A to a point B, and you're just along for the ride as a player while the DM kind of tells you, okay, now this is going to happen, now this is going to happen, as you come up against random encounters, whether they be combat or not. So that's something that the game kind of suffers for. A lot of people don't like that style. It's something I've learned over the years as being a DM, and I realize I'm not getting to the product yet, but bear with me on this. So I am interested, and I think it is valuable to have a product that specifically tries to fix this element of D&D. Now, how you fix that, you can come up with a lot of different avenues, and it kind of depends on what you're looking to actually fix and what the diagnosis of the problem is. And I think this particular product doesn't necessarily do what I'm looking for when it comes to trying to fix the exploration component of D&D. The biggest thing I ran into, for example, when I was playing in our Tomb of Annihilation campaign, the entire Jungles of Chult is a hex crawl. And that's kind of a different thing when it comes to exploring, but it turns the entire map into maybe more of a dungeon crawl itself, which now you've got my attention because I just mentioned how dungeon crawling is the better thing to do. Although the players still aren't quite making their choice in terms of like, well, let's go here, this looks dangerous. Instead, you're just using the overland map as a point of this is this area, and so there's a potential to maybe get lost, and you have to make some skill challenges and things. The problem I ran into is when I was first, if we go all the way back to Tomb of Annihilation, I was creating all of these systems and looking at the hex crawl rules and coming up with all these different things. And then once he actually got into the game and started playing, and again, this is anecdotally with my group, we didn't really want or have a need to do a lot of that. So I didn't ever necessarily need my players to get lost, for example. The Jungles of Chult are huge. There's plenty of content to have. Even if they know exactly we're going from point A to point B, we can still have plenty of encounters, and that would be enough. And I try to be very leery about how many random encounters I'm using because, again, the fun stuff is usually not in between getting to the destination. It's at the destination where there's actually a cool like dungeon crawler thing to interact with instead of all the encounters along the way. So unfortunately, what this particular book does, and it's a very short book. It's only about 20 pages, and half those pages are AI generated art, full page. Is it turns all of exploration into a hex crawl, and I think that's a problem. I don't have a problem with hex crawls overall. I just think that they should be done very sparingly, and I think I'm trying to remember a good example. There was in our Prince of the Apocalypse campaign, there was a section of the Dasaran Valley where you interact with the air cult. It's where the tower is and where the entrance to the air temple is. I don't remember the name. It's like Sighing Valley or something, or Valley of Wind. I don't know, but it's a little bit. You could turn that into like a hex crawl because it's kind of a smaller. It's still a region, but it's not like a huge, map with a bunch of cities and stuff. It's just one kind of little dangerous area. That to me is an example of where you want to use a hex crawl, and then I would obviously include that in the adventuring days. So my players aren't, long resting or anything. They're just included. In fact, I have a whole system of not letting you long rest when you're traveling in general to help fix the exploration pillar. What I would not do is turn the entire world into a hex crawl, because we did that with Tomb of Annihilation, Jungles of Chult, kind of makes sense, but even then it gets to be very tedious, and I don't like having my players just get lost, because ultimately what it does, and what this product does, is it creates a lot of extra rules that I don't think we need, and it slows the game down in the part of the game that's the weakest part of the game, which is anything that's not a dungeon, frankly, or like in a town where you're, during a big cinematic scene, or you're talking with people, or, it's the weakest element of the game. And instead of trying, I just don't think this product really improves upon that so much as it just creates extra mechanics. And then the failure point is always just, well, you could get lost, which means you could run into more encounters. I don't like it when any product has as a penalty random encounters, because I don't think random encounters are great in general. I think combat takes a long time in D&D, and not every encounter has to be perfectly meaningful, but I think you have to really pick and choose your battles, literally as a DM, to make them worthwhile. And I really don't want to throw a bunch of random encounters at my players, because it's just going to slow the game down. It's going to take forever, and we're trying to get to the fireworks factory. We're trying to get to the fun thing that's beyond the next location. So I realize I went off on a pretty big rant about exploration, but my point is, I do think trying to improve travel specifically, which is what this is, exploration, this is in terms of traveling, very much what the designers tried to do, is a worthy thing to try to do. But I wasn't necessarily on board with and again, it's the two things that this product tries to do is A, turn all of travel into a hex crawl, and B, also use a lot of skill challenges. And I think skill challenges is a mixed thing for a lot of folks. I don't believe 5th edition even really endorses or uses skill challenges. I don't have a big problem with them, but I think they should be done sparingly and in only certain situations. And in fact, there is one part in this supplement where they use a skill challenge for when the players want to flee an enemy, which fleeing to me and to most people, I would imagine, is just a chase in reverse. But the chase rules aren't that great in the Dungeon Master's Guide either, so that's something we can improve upon. And turning a mass retreat into a skill challenge, now you've got something interesting, because that allows you to fall forward. It's got various methods of success. You can built in some pretty easy penalties and successes, variable with how the players roll with that. So I did think that was a good idea for a skill challenge, but just turning like having to long rest and set up camp into a skill challenge, or just trying to explore and track down creatures as a skill challenge. The tracking thing was also really crazy. Like, you're supposed to track a creature and you have to make a number of skill checks equal to its CR level. Seemed a little crazy to me. It's kind of too much, and everything feels like it's in service to just slowing the game down. I mean, even like you can see the example of Hexcrawl getting lost. Like, but what does getting lost do? Like, narratively, I know what getting lost does. It can be interesting from a narrative standpoint, but that's something you could bake into the story. But mechanically, which is all what this cares about, all it does is slow the game down. You're just not going in the right direction. You're having to spend more time, which means what? You're having to run into random encounters, and that is more work for the DM, and I don't want to have that happen. I would rather, if you're going to have your players get lost, just be a one and done. Hey, everybody make me a con save for exhaustion. Boom. Exhaustion sucks. I don't necessarily love that mechanic either, but we're not having to do an entire encounter for that. We're just including the fact that, hey, because you got lost, you missed this skill check, now it's going to take you a little bit longer in order to make it your next destination. This is something I've learned from years and years of playing and realizing how much travel is just... There's interesting things you can do with travel, obviously, but I think you need to either include the traveling as part of the adventuring day, and then you can include as part of their overall resources, and now you've baked it in with maybe some interesting, more scripted encounters. Or you need to eliminate a lot of your travel and just get from point A to point B a little bit quicker, and maybe allow like one check for something. And if you're in a dangerous area like the jungles of Chult, or a snowy peak or something, then you can work on survival for tracking skills, and then for exhaustion or something. But I do not like the idea of just throwing random encounters at the party for penalties on becoming lost or failing any kind of checks or anything, because I think, frankly, that also punishes the DM and everybody involved, because it's just a lot more work and slows the action down before when we get to the actual thing. And if you're not using those gritty rest rules, then it almost doesn't matter, because everybody can just long rest at the end. Now, to the designer's credit here, they do use gritty resting rules, where short rests take essentially the full 8-hour day, and then long rests actually take 7 days. I don't necessarily think you have to do that. What I do in my games is that long rests just do not happen if you're traveling normally. So it makes travel matter a little more, because you're actually having to worry about your resources, and encounters matter more. So you care whether you're using your resources and things. So in other words, the traveling to the destination to do the thing is all included in that adventuring day, because you're not just automatically long resting. In this case, and gritty rest rules kind of account for that, but this one also includes the fact that you could turn into a skill challenge to try to long rest. But I just think that's going to slow the game down a little bit. One thing it does for exploration is give everybody a job, which isn't a terrible idea, but unfortunately that job is just in service to the hex crawl. But for example, somebody can be making a map, so it prevents you from getting lost better. The navigator is the one that's actually making the check to avoid getting lost. There's somebody whose job is to track down animals. I don't know if that would be different than the navigator. I mean, I feel like the one person who's like the ranger or the druid or somebody would be just doing all these tasks, but I think you're supposed to divide them up so different people can do different things, which is, I think, a good concept, because you're turning it into like a ship travel where everybody's got jobs on a ship or something, or on a caravan, and so it makes sense why make everybody do a thing. But a lot of these things just don't seem very like a forager, but there's nothing like it says, well, you're technically not supposed to go without food and water. I know not everybody does what we do, which is just ignore rations and food and water because it's not interesting. And I think you can just assume, for the same reason we don't see people go to the bathroom on the movies or something. You just assume things are happening that we don't need to care about. But if you do, then you can turn it to more gritty rules. And maybe that's part of my disconnect with this whole system is I don't run a very gritty, realistic game. I run it kind of in service to 5e, where the players just become superheroes and almost don't have to worry about a lot of these aspects and travel. But I do use, exhaustion rules, for example, if we're in a dangerous environmental area and we have to worry about that. And I distill it down to maybe a single survival check or something. Now, this supplement does do two things that I like quite a bit. Oh, first of all, I want to talk about the art. So you've seen me flip through this art, and the art looks really cool. It's like full page, like amazing art. There is a bit of a caveat here where all the images were generated by Midjourney. So it uses AI generated art. I'm not going to necessarily pass judgment on doing that. I have, pretty mixed, complicated feelings about using AI art. I will say, however, that in this case, especially, there is a huge over-reliance on that. If your product is about 20 pages long and half those pages are full color art that was generated by AI, that honestly feels kind of disingenuous to me. That feels like it kind of feels like you're the kid at school who's turned in a paper and used like 14 size font. We're supposed to use 12 size font, just like pad it out. And there's no reason for this. There's no like page, limit or something. I mean, other than you just think having it look at 20 pages is better than 10 pages. But I'm telling you right now, there's about 10 pages worth of content and a bunch of nice looking, but ultimately AI generated art that is full page art. I do think that's a disservice to folks looking at maybe the page count, looking at what kind of content you get here. So I'm going to have to ding the product for that. But I will say the two things that I do like that this product does is introduces two optional rules that kind of have nothing to do with exploration, honestly, which are extraordinary actions and connections. So extraordinary actions are things that characters can do by spending their hit dice, which is interesting because everybody has hit dice, so everybody can spend them. Usually you spend your hit dice on a short rest to heal up, but other than that, there's not very many character systems or class systems that use hit dice. And something I've even played with as a DM is using hit dice penalty instead of exhaustion as a way of not having to give players that huge exhaustion debuff that could last a long time, but instead, hey, you lose some hit dice by exerting yourself. So maybe you just can't, fully recover as well as you could. So the examples would be you can just use them as hit dice, but in the middle of combat. You can use them to add bonuses to attack rolls or to saving throws or to be able to get a free disengage. Now, you say, hey, that's pretty powerful, even though you're spending hit dice. And the designer says, well, you also suffer a level of exhaustion. And I'm like, well, as much as I love this system, that tells me the players are never going to fucking use it. Because look at the worst, the worst barbarian subclass, which is, gosh, I forgot the name, Battle Rager or something, where they're like super raging. But whenever they rage, they suffer exhaustion. Like, nobody takes that because nobody wants to deal with the horrendous exhaustion. And in fact, it looks like they're changing how exhaustion works completely in the next iteration of D&D. So I don't think, I think it's a cool system to be able to have your players spend hit dice. And they are limited, I think, by proficiency bonus. There's a limit there. And they're spending hit dice, which is a finite resource they have. Which, some of these are more powerful than others. You can choose as a DM whether to allow some of them or not. But I would honestly probably get rid of the whole level of exhaustion thing. I think that is a bridge too far, and I just don't think players would at all engage with this system if they had to suffer from exhaustion in order to do it. I don't know if I would need to see an action to see the balance level, like to play a couple sessions with this and see if the players are using this too much. It really depends on how much you're long resting and how much you're forcing your players to use that hit dice in other ways, whether they get to use this and how many things they can do. I definitely see the disengage being probably one of the more useful ones they can do. So, but I don't think the exhaustion is very good. So this one, I do like the idea of it, but I would probably rebalance it to eliminate the exhaustion. The connections thing is the other one that I think is pretty cool. This is, at first when I read this, I was like, all right, you're, again, trying to put mechanics to something that should be done narratively, which is something I think this whole supplement is kind of guilty of, and something I think a lot of newer DMs, me included, were very guilty of when we first started doing D&D, which is writing game mechanics instead of kind of playing things by ear and just, I don't know if I can describe it, but letting things develop organically through the story, and then occasionally maybe we have to make a skill check or a roll or something. And maybe that's what my problem is with skill challenges a lot of times. Skill challenges are adding too many rules on top of something that maybe can be done more narratively with just a few good skill things here and there, actual checks. But I read some more about it, and I think it could actually be useful, and even for my group could be useful, because it does add a system for having players create content in the DM's world, which is something that I think a lot of DMs can struggle with. And in this case, it gives you a pool of points equal to your proficiency bonus, and you use that to basically generate NPCs, which could be literally any stat block it says in the monster manual, and you have them be connected to your character in some way. And the fun thing is they could be a friend, it could be a relative, it could be an enemy or a frenemy or whatever kind of cool connection you want there. And then there's this whole little favor system. It goes a little bit too far for what I would probably use it at, but I like the idea of letting your players basically generate these NPCs. And partly why I like it too is that a lot of times as DMs, what we do is we have the players create their whole backstory, and then they hopefully have connections that we can use. But then once the campaign goes on, that's a lot of times all we have. And then occasionally things might happen organically where somebody, a fun, character, a random NPC becomes that more interesting, character and becomes this kind of meme for the group or whatever. Like that's great, and that happens. That's happened in my games. But I do like that this system is there, especially for maybe players where that doesn't happen necessarily organically as much, and allows them to have a more set version and gives you more options, because technically as you reach new tiers of proficiency bonus, then you would gain either a new connection, or you can deepen that connection by adding more, I don't know, what is it, character class, background, or magic item to that particular NPC. And I think as a DM, that's great because it gives you the tools to then use that person. You can, have them be a quest giver or capture them, and that makes it more, here's your motivation, or maybe they can betray the players. Like there's all kinds of great story things you can do as long as you have those connections, and letting your players create those connections is actually a great idea. I don't think it has a lot to do with exploration necessarily. This is pretty much all RP, but it's good advice in general. So I would give a thumbs up to that entire idea. All right, this review is hilariously long for such a relatively short product, so let's get to my pros and cons for Zem's Guide to Exploration. You could probably guess my pros. The extraordinary actions that use hit dice in more interesting ways, even though I would get rid of the exhaustion penalty there. I still like the idea of players being able to use their hit dice in things other than just healing. I think that's actually pretty cool. And I think a lot of RPG systems actually do that as well, where players have like this kind of hero pool of points or something that can be used for different cool effects, especially if it's like you're in dire straits and you just need one kind of final push or something. And connections, which I just talked about, that allow players to create interesting NPCs with meaningful interactions. That's a great idea. It's something I would definitely tell players to do at character creation, but this system would allow players to also do it, halfway through the campaign or something, especially if they feel a little bit more unsatisfying towards not having created those meaningful NPCs organically in some other way. Then hey, you can just generate them with this system. Cons, I just don't think that hex crawls and skill challenges actually improve exploration that much. It's not what I was looking for to improve on the travel aspect of D&D. I think both those things, hex crawls and skill challenges, have their places, but they should be used sparingly and in very specific situations. And in this case, it's saying like, hey, use this whenever you travel. We would revolt, and the DM, would be the first to revolt if this was the case. I just think it would slow the game down way too much, and frankly just not be very interesting and focus too much on the stuff that's not interesting in D&D 5e. My other con is I will ding this product for using too much AI-generated art. I have, again, complicated feelings about it. I don't think you should be cursed or damned for using it at all, but clearly using full-page art like this, it really feels like it's just kind of padding out this supplement, and it's frankly kind of jarring. Final verdict, Zem's Guide to Exploration features some good advice and interesting ideas, but relies far too heavily on hex crawls and skill challenges that ultimately slow the game down. Thank you for watching this video review. You can see my written review at roguewatson.com. You can watch more reviews and follow our own D&D adventures here on my channel, and you can support my work at patreon.com/roguewatson. Thank you.